listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second of this webinar series on understanding and recording performance for the birth traits. My name's Alec McDonald. If you've got your screen up, I'm the old guy in the hat, and the young guy on the right is Andrew Byrne, who we're both part of the SBTS team, but we're aware that we've got some TBTS people involved as well. Andrew, I think there's a slide to come up. Okay, as we've indicated on this slide, this is the second of the series on understanding and recording information for the birth traits. If you happen to have missed the first series, it is up on the SBTS website, and you should be able to load it down. If you have any trouble loading it down because of its size, contact the SBTS group and they'll send you out a CD with that first session. As I say, it is one of the a series of 6, and just to remind you that if you do want to go into the next group in the next webinars, you do need to register again for each one. Okay, a bit of housekeeping. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please call that mobile number there, 0418 412 042. As I'm assuming many of you were on last week, so if you do want to ask questions, you simply type them into the question field as shown on the screen, and then you must hit send so they come in. Now, if your question box does disappear, you need to click on that double arrow to get it back. So, any other housekeeping, Andrew? No? Okay. This is, I'm just going to throw to Andrew, and he'll do the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex, and good evening, everybody. It's good to see we've got a good number of people who have come back from after last week's webinar. So, as Alex has touched on tonight, we'll really be going through the birth EBVs, so the EBVs that are available for the birth traits. So we'll start off first of all by providing an overview of what EBVs are available, and that particularly will focus on the birth weight EBV, the 2 Calving EBVs, so Calving Direct and Calving Daughters, and then the gestation length EBV. Once we've discussed those EBVs, we'll probably break for questions before moving into a bit of an outline of the information that you need to record if you believe that those EBVs are important to you and would like to have those EBVs available on your animals. So what performance information you need to record. And just to conclude the webinar, we'll discuss some of the considerations that you need to make when recording that performance information. So as Alex mentioned in his introduction, and as per last week, I'd really encourage you, if you've got any questions as we're going along, to send those through, and we'll make sure we cover all, or provide answers to as many of those as we possibly can. So to begin, the first EBV that we need to focus on is the birth weight EBV. Now there's nothing too dramatic about which trait that's referring to. As the name suggests, the birth weight EBV is providing us with genetic differences between animals in the weight of the calf at birth. So the EBV itself is expressed in kilograms, with lower EBVs, and it says they're lower more negative, but generally just lower EBVs, indicating a lighter calf or a smaller expected birth weight, which generally indicates more ease of calving. So that's the first EBV. Generally from the name, we can interpret that fairly easily. The second EBV which is available relates to gestation length. So gestation length giving us differences in animals from the number of days from the actual conception through to the date of birth of the calf that is born. So we're not looking there at the start of joining or anything like that. It's the actual date of conception through to the actual date that the calf is born. So the EBVs are expressed in days, so that's the units. In the birth weight EBVs are expressed in kilograms. The gestation length EBVs are expressed in days. So as per all these EBVs, they're expressed in the units of measurement. And in this case, again, lower EBVs, so lower gestation length EBVs, are associated with a shorter length of gestation, which generally is associated with lighter birth weight and therefore improved calving ease. So that's those first two EBVs, the birth weight and the gestation length EBVs, when we're selecting for both of these, then the lower EBVs would generally be the more favourable ones. The next trait which we need to look at is the calving ease direct trait. So we've got two different EBVs for calving ease, both relating to different attributes. So calving ease direct, as the slide suggests, is providing us with differences in the ability of a sire's calves to be born unassisted from 2-year-old heifers. So this is basically if we join a bull to 2-year-old heifers, what difference in the level of unassisted calvings would we expect? And the EBV is expressed in percentage units. So animals with higher calving ease EBVs, we would expect a higher percentage of unassisted calvings if we join them to 2-year-old heifers. So conversely to the birth weight and the gestation length EBV, higher EBVs would indicate more ease of calving. And when we're trying to interpret these EBVs, a general rule I think that you can use is you can gauge which direction to select on the EBV from the name of the EBV. With calving ease, it's a calving ease EBV, not a calving difficulty EBV. So the higher EBVs indicate more calving ease, which is the way that we want to select on this trait. The next EBV is calving ease daughters. So again, relating to calving ease and expressed in percentage of unassisted calvings. But this time, as opposed to calving ease direct, it's not if we join a bull to heifers what level of calving ease we would expect, but once that sire's daughters are on the ground and themselves are calving at 2 years of age, what difference in the percentage of unassisted calvings would we expect? So it's the next stage, if you like, of the calving ease, and we tend to get a different relationship between calving ease direct and calving ease daughters. Both those traits actually tend to indicate or operate fairly independently of one another, which is why we have two different EBVs, as they both relate to two different traits relating to those animals that we're using. So I guess just to recap there, we've got the 4 different EBVs relating to the birth traits. The first one is the gestation length EBV, and when we're selecting on animals, we'd be after a shorter gestation length or a lower EBV. For birth weight, again, a lower EBV or would indicate lighter birth and more ease of calving. And then 2 calving ease EBVs, a calving ease direct and a calving ease daughters. And when selecting on these EBVs, generally the more favourable will be the higher the EBV, the better. This probably raises the question as to if all these EBVs are available, which ones are the most important of the birth EBVs? It's important to note, and we'll discuss the information which goes into calculating these EBVs a little later on, but the calving ease EBVs take into account all the gestation length information, all the birth weight information, plus some calving difficulty type of information to come up with a combined EBV across all those traits. So if the economically important trait that we're trying to select on is calving ease, then if all those 4 EBVs were available, then you would want to focus your selection on the calving ease EBVs. Unfortunately, in practice, what happens is we tend not to have suitable or enough accuracy to actually report the calving ease EBVs on our yearling or 2-year-old bulls that we're selecting for use within a breeding program. And so we tend to go back and select on some of the components of those which may be available, being the birth weight and the gestation length EBV. So that's the 4 different EBVs relating to birth. And with that, I might pass back to Alex for some questions. So I'd encourage you, if you've got any questions regarding the actual interpretation of those EBVs, that you send them in now, and we'll go through and discuss those.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. just for everyone's interest, we actually have 107 people on at the moment, which is great, from all over Australia. And another bit of important information, we had a -6 frost last night, and it feels like it's going to be about a -8 tonight, so see if you can beat that. However, 2 questions, Andrew. First one is from John Spearpoint. How is gestation length calculated for natural matings?
Okay, thanks Alex. We will cover that in a second, but effectively for natural matings, that information is not used in the gestation length EBV at the moment, so the only information which feeds into the gestation length EBV is from AI matings, where we do know the date of conception. There has been some information collected on observed natural matings, but at this stage that information is not being utilised, as we would need to ask the question, I suppose, if that mating that has been observed, whether that's actually been the mating which has resulted in the conception. So that information is currently being stored to see whether it does hold up, but at the moment the only information going to the gestation length EBVs are the actual AI matings where we know that date of conception.
Okay, thanks Andrew. I hope that answers that for you, John. Second question from Jenny Gregory. Why is there only a calving EBV for a sire rather than a cow?
Okay, it's probably, Jenny, just the way that I describe the EBV. The calving ease animals will be available on all sexes. So the calving ease there direct would relate to the cows as well as the sires. Okay,
and I think I could add to that, sires are more likely to have the calving EBVs of sufficient accuracy. Sometimes females or cows will not have sufficient accuracy to publish, but it is calculated on both sexes. That's the questions on that section, Andrew, so I'll just throw back to you for the second part of your presentation.
Okay, thank you Alex. So we'll move on now to, I guess, if you're interested in having these EBVs available on your animals, so they're important to your breeding objective and you'd like to select on them, then what's the information that you need to record? So to start off with, while not directly relating, I guess, to the EBVs themselves, but when we're going through this webinar series, we're kind of starting, I guess, now at the birth, there is some information that is required for not only the birth EBVs, but also all the other traits. So when you're looking at recording information and what information do you need to record, the first point of call that you really do need to record on these animals is the date of birth. So when an animal is born, we require an accurate date of birth. Now, the reason for that is a lot, well, it doesn't relate to the birth EBVs, but for all our later traits, obviously there's a lot of adjustments made for the different ages of animals. So having an accurate date of birth is fairly crucial to all the calculation of the Breedplan EBVs. Obviously, we'd also need a sire and a dam recorded. So for all calves, we do ideally want pedigree to calculate these EBVs. There is the facility within Breedplan to have multiple sires. So if you've got a multiple sire joining, then Breedplan can actually calculate EBVs of animals from multiple sires. So ideally, though, you would have an individual sire identified. And I guess if you are using multiple sires, one of the things that you can weigh up is whether you use some DNA verification to identify the actual individual sire for that particular calf. Another 2 bits of information which you can record at birth, which will have an impact on your Breedplan EBVs, the number of calves in that birth, so whether we have singles or twins or triplets, I suppose, but generally singles or twins. And for any embryo transfer calves, it's important that you record the recipient dam information. And the reason for that is animals or ET calves that go into the system, Breedplan takes account of the different recip dam that they've been reared on, whether that be by different breeds, and so it looks at the different maternal effect that recip dam may be having on the performance of the calf when it's calculating the EBVs. So the first point of call when you look at recording the performance information, while not directly related to those EBVs, is that bit of birth information that you require. Generally, there are different ways of submitting that information, but most of that information will be recorded with your breed society. So all the information that you submit to your breed society also feeds into the breed plan analysis. So if you're recording your date of birth, your sire, your dam, versus single or a twin calf, and any recip dam information with your breed society, that's probably the easy way of going around it. The recip dam information, some breed societies are collecting that with their registrations. Others, you may be sending that directly into Breedplan. It will just depend on your particular breed. So if we move now into the actual birth traits, the first trait, obviously birth weight. The information which goes into calculating that, if you're interested in that, is you obviously have to collect the weights of calves at birth. So we'll talk about how you may look at doing that, but ideally that weight of the calf at birth would be recorded within 24 hours. I've got on that slide that can be recorded within 48. Generally that means if you miss them one day, then you'll get them the next day. After about 48 hours, then we start getting significant differences in the weight of that calf from what it was at birth, so it starts to become not so useful for the breed plan analysis. I guess as a general rule, which I've heard people use, is if you can still catch the calf, then you can still take a weight on it. The information, if you've got your birth weights, there'll be two ways of submitting that information into breed plan. Generally, most people will be recording that when they do their calf registrations, so where they're going through and actually collecting or sending in their registrations, there'll be birth weight on those forms, or they'll be sending in electronically. Alternatively, you can submit that information directly to Breedplan. Now, in terms of how do you record birth weight, that being the obvious question, birth weight's one of those traits where there are many, many different techniques, and really my advice to you would be to come up with a technique which works for your operation and your kind of facilities. I do have a few examples here of how people have been collecting birth weight. So the first one here that'll come up on the slide is basically a fairly simple system where we've got a set of clock face scales, and hopefully you'll be able to see there just a leather strap, that's two leather straps which wrap around the calf, around the belly of the calf there, and they just lift the clock face up in front of their eyes and take the measurement. So that's one way of doing it. Alternatively, people probably have also had just a set of bathroom scales which they may lift the calf on and take a measurement there. So while holding the calves, step on themselves and weigh obviously the combined weight, and then subtract your own weight to come up with the birth weight of the calf. The next step in doing it is there's a number of actual calf weighing cradles, so commercially available cradles, which can be mounted on either the back of a utility or on a four-wheel motorbike. So you can see there there's two examples. They are have got different cradles which you place the calf into. There's a set of weigh beams from the scales which you have mounted there, and that'll take the measurement of the calf. In terms of where they're available and those things, there are a number of different ones available. The one that I'm aware of is probably available out of GIRA, out of an engineering company up there called Ramage Engineering. Staff at SPTS can provide you with contacts for that if you want, or you can just find the phone number and give them a call accordingly. The actual cost of those cradles does vary depending on if you're getting the whole setup, so including the weigh beams. I believe the cost is in the magnitude around $1,500, $1,600 last time I looked at it. If you're just getting the cradle and using your weigh beams from your other scales, then it's far cheaper than that. So it's probably just if you're interested in that, then contact the Ramage Engineering and GIRA, and they'll be able to help you out with it. There are also a number of other companies, I think, which are offering cradles like that. The next example I've got here, I think, is just a home engineered type of setup. So here in this case, there's a trailer coming around that they tow around behind their motorbike. It has a table there that they set up with all their tagging set up and those type of things. It has a cradle there at the back which they place the calf in, do their tagging, and it also takes the weight of the calf at the same time. So That's another possible example. The last example that I have here of just showing you how people are doing it is one out of, I think, one of the research stations in Queensland. So in this case they have an arm going off the side of the Toyota there, and clock face scales, and then just two chains which they loop around the calf, hook the calf up and take the clock face measurement there. So there's a range of different ways of actually measuring birth weight, and as I said at the start, I'll be recommending to you to really just come up with a setup that works for you. And if you're trying to work out what that setup would be, probably discussing it with other people that are actually currently collecting birth weight in your area may be a good start, and they'll give you some information, and you'll be able to go through and work out something which it works for you. So that's the birth weight trait. The next trait that we have available to us is obviously the gestation length. We've touched on this information, what information goes into calculating this previously, but effectively at this stage the gestation length is only from ABRi joinings. We do also have the ability to feed in hand mating joinings. That's effectively where the only natural joining that occurs is actually there's only one opportunity for that natural mating, and so we know that's the one which results in the conception. Now in this case, when you're looking at recording information for gestation length, you don't need to go through and actually work out what the gestation length is. All you need to do is send in an AI date. So when you send in your registrations, there'll be a spot there for the date of AI. Send in the date of AI. You obviously also recorded the date of birth of the calf, and Breedplan will go through and actually calculate that gestation length information for you. So you certainly don't need to go through it and do it. Just record the date of AI when you're doing your registrations with your breed society, and that information will feed into the gestation length, EBVs. The next two traits are obviously our calving ease and calving ease direct and calving ease daughters. The information to record for that is our calving difficulty scores. So with each score which is calving which occurs, you record the level of calving difficulty. So from 1 to 5, 1 being unassisted, 2 being what they call an easy pull. In my interpretation of that is basically some assistance is given to the calving, but it's not mechanical assistance, so you're just doing it yourself. Then 3 being hard pull, so that's where you'll actually go through and give mechanical assistance. 4 is that the vet was required, so veterinary assistance, and 5 being malpresentation. So they're generally the 5 scores. There is also an additional score of 6 for voluntary cesareans. So if for some reason you do a voluntary cesarean, then and that being that there's no calving difficulty, but you just decide on that day you're going to go through and get the calf out, there is actually a score of 6, but that's not one which we generally put out there because I don't think that's a very common practice. So they're the 1 to 5 scale. You don't need to get too worked up, I suppose, between whether it's a score of 3 or a score of 4 or those type of things. Within the analysis, the ones, the unassisted calvings, will be treated as a score. The 2, being the easy pull, will be treated as a score in its own right. The 3s and the 4s, so the hard pulls and then the veterinary assistance, will actually be grouped together, so you don't need to worry about if you've managed to get one out but it was actually harder calving than the one that you got the vet out, then those scores will be grouped together. And the 5s, the malpresentations, so the breech births and those type of things, they'll actually be removed from the analysis. So you've got the scores that you record on your animals on each of the calvings. You submit that information with your calf registrations. So generally when you send in your calf registrations, like a lot of this birth information, there'll be a spot on there for your calving difficulty scores, and that will feed into the calving ease analysis. Now the calving ease EBVs then are actually calculated from the calving difficulty scores plus all the birth weight plus plus the gestation length information contribute or combine together to contribute to those combined calving EBVs that are calculated. So that's the kind of the information which you need to record for the calving EBVs. Ideally, the full set of calving difficulty scores, birth weights, and gestation length, or in this case, basically AI dates. So just some considerations when you're recording this information. So some of the things that you probably need to pay attention to. The first thing is, to get the most out of your breed plan analysis, you need to record information on all calves. So all calves which are born, ideally you will send in the information on those. So that will require you to not necessarily register that calf with your breed society, but just record it on their system. The reason for that is obviously most of the extremes, particularly relating to birth weight, are our dead calves, so they actually feed back the best information into the analysis. While you're obviously not interested in that dead calf itself, it'll feed information back in for its sire and its dam. It'll also be used as a comparison to the other calves which are born alive, so in providing their lighter birth weights and those type of things. So it will provide very useful information, so you want to make sure that you're recording information on all calves. I guess one of the things with birth weight is it can be difficult and time consuming to collect. So if you were worried about that you wouldn't be able to record it on all calves, my recommendation would be you probably just choose groups of animals to record that on. So whether you decide, okay, my first calf heifers, I'm checking those twice a day or whatever, and I'm just going to record the birth weights on those heifers as a start, and then see how I find it, and then maybe move into doing the mature cows. But ideally, in a perfect world, we'd be recording information on all the births which are occurring. The next consideration, this is just a common misconception, is there's been problems in the past. If people haven't actually observed the birth themselves, observed the calving, then they have been putting that down with a score of 0. In the past, the description of that calving difficulty score of 0 was unobserved. What we're looking at, even if you haven't observed the calving, but you're going around and there's a perfectly happy live calf with no sign of calving difficulty when you go to check them in the morning or at night, then you'd be recording that as an unassisted birth. So you don't need to actually observe the mating to record a calving difficulty score, and certainly if you put a score of 0 in, it may still be on some of the forms that's unobserved. That is basically, interpretation of that is that birth has not been scored for calving difficulty. So you'd be putting those calving difficulties in on all animals and using a score of 1 for the unassisteds. The next point is really for Breedplan to use the calving difficulty scores effectively, then we do need some variation in those calving difficulty scores. So that's not to say if all the calves are born unassisted to make up some variation there, but it's important to be aware that if all the births are unassisted, then it doesn't identify for Breedplan any differences in the level of calving difficulty, and so effectively that information doesn't contribute to the calculation of the EBVs, and instead the EBVs will be more generated off the birth weight and gestation length information where we've got differences in animals. So if there is some variation in your calving difficulty scores, then it's very important to record that so we make sure we get the most out of the calving difficulty information which is coming into the analysis. The next consideration which you need to be aware of is, like with a lot of the post-birth information which we'll talk about in the coming weeks, it's important that if there have been any differences in the management of your females prior to calving, which will have influenced the birth weights and the calving difficulty of that you're seeing of your calves, then it's important to put a birth management group in. So you have the ability to put in a management group for the birth information. Generally, it'll be recorded with your breed society when you're doing or recording all that information. So under that manner, you will be going through and just identifying if there's been any differences in management within the mob or between mobs, between the females basically in your herd, which may have resulted in differences in that birth performance. Now, within the Breedplan analysis, the performance from the first calf heifers at birth will never be directly compared with the performance of the older cows or your mature cows. So if you're managing your first calf heifers differently to your older cows, you don't need to put in a management group, but it's basically within those two groups. If there have been any females that have been managed differently, then it's important to record that birth management information, that management group. The last point I think here that I've got is obviously with the birth information you do need to be aware of protective mothers. So people have been injured in the past recording birth weights from cows getting stirred up. So it is important, particularly if you've got staff, to be mindful of that and come up with a system which hopefully prevents that from happening as much as you possibly can. But it is important to note that when you are recording this, that certain cows and bloodlines can become very protective, and you need to be aware of the safety issues when you're going through and actually recording some of this information. My last point on this is basically for the birth information. Then really, if you're interested in those EBVs, then you've got two options as I see it, to either to record all the information properly or don't do it at all. So there are a number of different ways, I suppose, of trying to estimate birth weight with some girth tapes and different kind of tapes which takes different measures of the calf. All of those have different levels of accuracy. My message to you out of this, or recommendation, would be if you're interested in these birth traits, then actually make sure you're recording birth weight accurately by using proper scales and proper equipment, and that way you'll get the best possible EBVs. So just a summary of the information that's required for the birth traits. We need, obviously, when you've got animals at birth, we need a date of birth, sire and dam, the number of calves in that birth, recipient dam information for any of the embryo transfer calves, a birth weight, a calving difficulty score, AI dates for any of your AI joinings, and birth management groups for any animals which have been treated differently prior to calving, where that would have had an impact on their actual birth performance. So Alex, that brings to conclusion that section, so I might pass it back to you for any questions.
Yeah, thanks Andrew. We've got 3 good questions here. I'm actually going to do the easy one, and that's a question from Odette Klein about which is what is hand mating, which is a very good question. My interpretation is hand mating is where, particularly in small herds, breeders actually observe the cows on heat, bring them into the bull and watch the bull serve, so that they know that the exact date of the cow was served, and they then also know that the cow wasn't served again. So that's hand mating. So now the more difficult ones and good questions. First one from Brian Mobbs. Good day, Brian. Owing to OH&S issues, is there any thoughts of going back to a 200-day weight and calculating back to birth weight? Andrew.
Okay, if I'm interpreting this question correctly, and you might like to correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, on this, but effectively, if the birth weight hasn't been observed at the moment, then the birth or the information which recorded on the other related traits, and predominantly that may be the later weights, will contribute to that actual calculate the birth weight EBV. So obviously the birth weight EBV will have lower accuracy than if we've got an actual measurement recorded, but in the absence of a birth weight, it will use some of the later information, the later weight information in the calculation of that birth weight, because from analysis of the databases, all the information which has been collected, we do know that animals which are heavier at birth, so they've got high growth genetics to birth, tend to also have high growth genetics post-birth, so to 2, 4 and 600 days. I guess that the limitation of that is we're not really identifying the curve benders, so those animals which may not follow that standard relationship between the traits, and that's really the benefit of collecting the birth information, is you are identifying those curve benders. I guess there are OH&S concerns from protective mothers, which do raise issues about the actual collection of this, but at the moment I don't think there's been any really suitable solution to actually recording these birth rates other than to actually weigh the calves. I'm not sure if you've got anything to add to that, Alex.
No, Andrew, you've covered that very well. Next question is from Colin Godfrey, and it relates to some of the things you've already talked about. Some cows are very protective of newborn calves. How do you weigh them safely?
I don't necessarily know that I've got an answer to that one.
I'll make a suggestion, Andrew. And it's not always practical, but obviously if you've got two people involved, one to weigh the calf and the other to watch the cow, it's probably as safe as you can get. But there's no foolproof way other than if the cow's too aggressive, then you don't get a birth weight.
No, I have actually heard, Alex, of some people where they have their cows kind of calving, I guess, in close to the yard, not so much their cattle yards, but in a smaller paddock, and then they're drifting the cows as they've calved off, and they actually run them through a kind of very small yard between the paddock they're calving in and the paddock they're drifting them off to, where they try and confine the cow and the calf and then split the calf off and actually do it. But I don't know how practical that would be, but some people are going around it that way to try and take the message out of it, the danger, I guess, out of it, or difficulty out of it. One thing I would say from people who've been collecting this information, and it's been one of the criticisms of those calf weighing cradles, is when the calf is turned upside down, then it does tend to bellow, and as soon as it bellows, then the cow can become more protective. So coming up with a system where you're not actually turning the calf upside down, so maybe some of those systems with the clock face scales where they're lifting the calf may mean that the calf's happier and therefore the cow's happier, but I don't think there's a very simple answer to that other than just to work out a way that works for you.
Okay, a couple more questions just come in. One from Clinton Watling. How much does DNA testing cost if needed? I assume, Clinton, you're referring to the fact that if you don't mother up the calves on a daily basis, can you do it by DNA? Simple answer is the cost of a DNA type is a bit of the calf itself is around $24, but of course you're going to have a DNA type on the dam as well. So you're looking, if they're not recorded, something like $48 a calf. Now one for you, Andrew. What's the maximum length of calving period per management group? That's from Sally Keane.
Okay, I think if I'm interpreting this correctly again, Breedplan will directly compare the birth performance of animals that are born within 45 days of one another. So I'm fairly sure that's across all our breeds. For some it may go out to 60 days. I think perhaps some of the northern breeds, particularly Brahman, may actually have a 60-day period there, but generally for all the breeds that I'm aware of and work closely with, that's a 45-day period where Breedplan will actually directly compare the performance information together.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. And the last question from Rod Reed, which I'll have a go at it. Is this more suited to AI calves and natural matings? Rod, I assume you're talking about recording gestation lengths, and the answer is obviously yes. We only get good gestation lengths from AI matings. Just before you go, Andrew, another one just jumped up. Grant Neep, the birth weight we get back on the EBVs, how does that refer to the actual birth weight of the calf? Can you look at it at the EBV and be able to tell the actual birth weight of the calf?
Okay, the short answer is no, you can't. What the EBVs are giving you is the differences between the weights of calves that you would expect to see in any production system. So obviously the actual birth weight that you get will be influenced by not only the genetics that the animal carries, but also the environment in which it's run. So whether it be in good conditions versus poor environmental conditions, that will affect the actual raw or the actual birth weight that you see. So all that the EBV is giving you is the differences in the actual or between animals in the birth weight that we would expect. And I guess the transformation or the translation to the actual birth weights is the change we saw with an autumn to a spring calving. For from what I've been told, when the same genetics moved from autumn to spring calving, then the birth weights increased by as much as kind of 4 kilos. So obviously the birth weights which you observe are influenced by that environmental effect. So the EBVs are only providing you with the differences between animals in any production system.
Okay, just to add to that, Grant, within any group of calves, the birth weight is always compared with the average birth weight of that group of calves over a 45-day or 60-day period on that property. So Andrew's correct, you can't infer a birth weight. And finally, another one's popped up from Robert Hayes. Any problems with heifers rejecting calves as you handle them? And Andrew might add to this, but I don't really think that's an issue. It's certainly not the same as merino sheep or something like that, where the ewes will head off and not come back. I don't think that's a problem with cattle.
No, I don't believe that has been a problem, Alex. It hasn't come across my desk.
Righto. Andrew, we've got one more. I know this is going on, but I'm sure they're all good questions. Odette Klein, what cow is AI? When a cow is AI'd, generally they will put her in a paddock with a bull. Without DNA, are you able to estimate who the sire is?
Okay, so really, in terms of the EBVs, it will only be using the AI date for when people are saying that the sire of the calf is the AI sire. So probably using the question which has been made here is just one step prior to when we actually get to the EBVs. The first thing that you would need to work out is the calf sired by the AI sire or the backup bull. When you're saying it's from the AI sire, then you'll put in the AI date when you're doing that registration, and that will be used in the calculation of the EBV.
Yeah, Andrew, if I can just add to that, I think Odette's really saying, how can you be sure whether it is the AI that got the calf or the follow-up bull? And the bottom line is, if the calf's born early to the AI, then you're pretty sure it's going to be AI, and if it's born late, which coincides with the bull, then it's almost certainly the follow-up bull. But there is quite a large variation in gestation length, so quite often those calves will drop halfway between the expected AI date and the expected bull date, and quite frankly, the only way you can determine whether it's the AI or the bull is by DNA. Okay, over to you, Andrew. That's a good lot of questions. Thank you for everyone that's sent them in.
I'll just tidy up, Alex, with some housekeeping. That's basically all that I have for you to present. So as with last week, basically this webinar will be made available from the SBTS and the TBTS websites. So should you want to go back and check anything, or if anyone that you're talking to has missed it and would like to be able to watch it, it should be made available from the website. Hopefully that'll be done in the next day or so. As with last week, again, we'll send out some written resources, so hopefully you will have received those with your reminder email about this one. There was some resources attached to that one, and we'll do the same thing. That'll hopefully go out on Wednesday or Thursday. Unfortunately, to attend the workshop, the webinar next week, you will need to register again. I do apologise for that. We just haven't worked out the way to actually go through and make sure you've only got to register once for the 6 webinars, but so you will have to register next week. And obviously, if there are any answers or questions that you have, I think we've got to most of them tonight, but if there are any questions which you have, then please contact the designated SBTS or TBTS technical officer in your breed. And I've just got a list of those that have come up on the screen now. So depending on your breed, that'll either be Philip, myself, Christian, Ashley, Peter, Alex or Michael, and you've got a phone number and an email address there. So you have those options. Alternatively, you can contact the Breedplan office directly, and there's a phone number and the website there. So that's all I've got tonight. Alex, I might pass back over to you just to close up.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you. You're not going to get off quite that lightly. There's a little cryptic question from Joe Gross which says 283 plus or minus 14 days. I think what Joe's suggesting is that it relates to the question from Odette. Depending on breed, expected gestation is about 283 days, but as Joe infers, gestations can be plus or minus 14 days. So when that bull goes in immediately after the AI, then you often need to DNA to be sure. So your final question, Andrew, is from Karen Dibley. When you talk about the 45-day period when comparing a group of calves, is the 46-day born calf only compared to that group from 46 to 90-day group, or do you adjust to compare it with the day 2 calf also because it is within the 45-day range?
Very good question. It's the former rather than the latter. So it simply looks at the first calf that's been born, finds its date of birth, goes 45 days, then goes through, finds the next calf date of birth, goes 45 days from that. So in terms of your question, yes, if it's born on the 46th day, it will only be compared with the calves born from 46 to 90 days. It doesn't do a whole lot of kind of concurrent slices. They're individual breakups there.
Okay, thanks Andrew, and I hope that answered your question, Karen, as we attempted to do for everyone else that provided questions. That's it for tonight. Thank you for your attendance and participation. We still have 99 attendees listening keenly, and I did skip through the list of people, and I saw lots of familiar names. So hello to everyone who knows me and who I know, and I'm sure Andrew is in the same position. So good night everyone, and I hope to see you next week.